The movie begins with Cairo, a girl whose parents live overseas. She's alone in an old, isolated house and has taken up writing as a hobby. One day, while walking through the woods, she stumbles upon a classroom where she meets Jonathan Miller. Jonathan is a middle-aged man who had dreams of becoming a successful writer but ended up becoming a teacher instead. When Cairo joins his class, he hands her a list of books to read for the course, but Cairo surprises him by revealing that she's already read all of them. Later, another student, Winnie, enters the scene. She's not just a classmate, but also a close friend of Cairo's. After school, the two head out for a meal, and while they're chatting, Jonathan notices that Cairo is carrying an adult book. Jonathan's friend, Boris, shows up for his usual coffee, picks up the book, and is taken aback when he realizes it's a book Jonathan himself had written. Both Jonathan and Boris are stunned by the discovery. Back at home that night, Jonathan's wife, Beatrice, is trying to catch his attention, but he's distracted by his thoughts about the book and his student. He shares with Beatrice that a student in his class has been reading his book, but just as he's trying to have a conversation with her, Beatrice gets a call from a friend, and the moment is interrupted. After a drink together, things get a little more intimate between Jonathan and Beatrice, but the evening takes another turn when Beatrice receives another call, leaving Jonathan feeling frustrated. The next day, Jonathan talks to Boris about what happened, and Boris can't resist making fun of him. As they continue their conversation, they see Cairo walking through the woods again. Jonathan, still feeling unsatisfied, watches her closely and asks if she's ever scared walking through the jungle. Cairo confidently responds, implying that she herself is the most dangerous thing out there, which lightens Jonathan's mood a little. At school, when he drops her books, clearly on purpose to get attention, Boris, who knows her game, asks her what she's after, and Winnie teases him in return. Cairo, watching from the sidelines, calls out Winnie for being a little crazy. Later, the two girls head to Cairo's house, where Cairo is feeling stressed about a question on her college application. She needs to mention her greatest achievement, but nothing feels unique enough to write about. As they talk it over, Winnie suggests that Cairo could write about an affair with her teacher, Jonathan. Cairo, unsure, points out the age gap between them, but Winnie brushes it off, assuring her that it's not unusual these days. Winnie goes on to describe how Jonathan sees Cairo in class, and this makes Cairo feel a bit embarrassed, but it also stirs something inside her. The next day, Cairo's interest in Jonathan grew stronger. She found herself watching him more closely. Eventually, Jonathan approached her, asking her to meet him after class. After class, he invited his friend Boris to join them for dinner. Boris left the place in a playful mood, even doing a little dance step. Jonathan, amused, tried to copy it, and just as he was, Cairo walked in. They both laughed it off and moved on. Jonathan was really impressed with a paragraph Cairo had written. He remembered it so well that he could recite it word for word. Cairo noticed how much attention he was paying to her work, and it made her feel proud. Jonathan then made her an offer. If she could write a short story in the style of her favorite author, he would give her full marks for the midterm. Cairo agreed without hesitation. She then revealed that she had read Jonathan's book too, and like him, she could recall many of its lines. Jonathan was even more impressed and invited Cairo to meet him over the weekend to discuss her assignment. That night, Jonathan went out to dinner with his wife Beatrice. Winnie, a familiar face, came by to take their order. Beatrice, sensing the connection between Jonathan and Cairo, asked if Winnie was the girl Jonathan had been talking about. Jonathan quickly clarified that it was Cairo, but Beatrice's jealousy was clear. She started criticizing Jonathan in front of Boris, saying that he no longer had the spark of a writer and had become just an ordinary teacher. On the weekend, Cairo went to the place Jonathan had mentioned. Jonathan followed her and sat next to her. A man began reading a poem aloud, and while he was focused on it, Cairo couldn't help but watch Jonathan. After the reading, Cairo stepped outside for a cigarette, and Jonathan joined her, sharing it with her in a moment of quiet connection. The next day, Cairo arrived at school dressed in an eye-catching outfit. When Boris asked her about it, she didn't say much. After he left, Cairo took the opportunity to talk to Jonathan. Their bond seemed to be growing stronger. As they walked to class, Jonathan received a message from Beatrice asking him to come home. In class, Cairo shared details about her favorite author, explaining how she planned to write her story in their style. Jonathan, eager to leave, quickly agreed without much thought. After Jonathan left, Winnie, playful as always, climbed onto Jonathan's desk and started teasing Cairo. Then Boris showed up, and the teasing shifted to him. Winnie mischievously slipped his phone into her clothes, but Cairo realized her own phone was missing. Meanwhile, Jonathan's plans with Beatrice were canceled since she was caught up with work. Just then, Jonathan got a call from Cairo realizing that he had mistakenly taken her phone. With no other plans, Jonathan decided to go and return it to her. When he arrived outside Cairo's house, it started raining. Cairo came outside in a thin dress, and they exchanged a long, meaningful gaze. Without saying a word, they shared a kiss. Then Jonathan returned home feeling conflicted. Cairo sent him an email, and when Jonathan's wife noticed his distracted mood, she complained that she couldn't get any work done with him around. So, Jonathan retreated to a small cabin to read Cairo's story. The story was bold, featuring a teacher and a student, just like him and Cairo. As he read, Jonathan grew excited and impulsively removed his pants, but the next day, things took a sharp turn. Jonathan didn't reach out to Cairo like he had before. Cairo, confused, asked him what had changed. Jonathan coldly told her he didn't like her story at all. It was full of mistakes. When Cairo pointed out that it was based on their relationship, he firmly denied any personal connection between them. To him, they were just a teacher and a student, and that was it. Cairo's heart shattered at his words. Jonathan gave her an ultimatum: either rewrite the story, or he would fail her on the midterm. Angry and hurt, Cairo stood her ground. She told Jonathan that her story was perfect, and that he was just afraid of the truths she had written, things he couldn't bring himself to say. To insult him further, she called him a common writer and challenged him to fail her if he dared. Later, Cairo went home in tears, drinking with her friend Winnie to drown her frustration. Meanwhile, Jonathan was clearly agitated. His wife asked him what was wrong, and he explained about Cairo's story. Beatrice, his wife, became upset, but before they could talk more, Boris arrived, and Jonathan's frustration grew. Back at Cairo's house, she and Winnie plotted. Cairo was convinced Jonathan was pretending to be close to her, so she asked Winnie to distract Boris. When Boris remained indifferent to Winnie's teasing, Cairo decided to take more drastic action. She and Winnie took photos of themselves without clothes and sent them to Boris. This immediately grabbed Boris's attention, and he left Jonathan's house. At the same time, Jonathan's wife received a call from the school. Everyone had learned about Jonathan and Cairo's affair. She was stunned and demanded an explanation. Jonathan denied it, insisting there was nothing between him and Cairo. The following day, Cairo wasn't in class. Instead, she was in the vice principal's office. When questioned, she didn't hold back, revealing everything. Jonathan had given her the midterm assignment early, they had shared cigarettes, and they'd met outside of school. When it was Jonathan's turn to explain, he hesitated, unsure of how to deny the truth. His hesitation was all the vice principal needed to understand, and Jonathan was suspended from his job. Outside the office, Boris told Jonathan he should have known better than to cross those boundaries. Now, Jonathan had to face the consequences of his actions. At home, Jonathan broke the news of his suspension to his wife. She started doubting him and asked again if something had happened between him and Cairo. Jonathan still denied it, but his silence spoke volumes. The fight escalated, with both of them listing each other's faults. In the end, Jonathan's wife decided to divorce him. Meanwhile, Winnie met with Cairo. She reminded Cairo that her actions had cost Jonathan his job, but now Cairo didn't care. She had shown Jonathan that she was more than he thought. With a smile, she declared that Jonathan would now truly understand who she was. As Cairo reflected on her success, she realized that not only had Jonathan lost his job, but he had also lost his wife. With everything crumbling around him, Cairo wondered if Jonathan would ever be able to write again. The film ends with her final thought hanging in the air. If you enjoyed this story and want more interesting movie recaps, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.